All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gordon Levine with ICF. My pronouns are he and him. Thank you all for having me. Our topic today is personally identifiable information. Unlike previous sessions, this collapses the overview and clinic session into one, though as Chris noted, we can look at additional sessions as needed. Before we get started, I want to share an anecdote from my own experience as a service provider to frame the issue of why personally identifiable information is an important topic. And it comes at it from sort of two directions. One of them is that personally identifiable information and protecting it is incredibly important. It's important to us as service providers, it's important to us as recipients of ESG, and it's important to our participants. And we're often confronted when we think about PII with the question, not just what are we doing with it, but imagine how we would feel if a participant was able to observe what we were doing with their data, and how would they feel? Would they feel good about it, or would they feel less good about it? And the anecdote that I wanted to share is like my most embarrassing moment as a young service provider. I was around 20 years old. I was in my first year working for a community action agency. I was working on a transitional living program and a rehousing program and a shelter plus care program. And we were understaffed, which is like, as you would imagine. I was responsible for all of our HMIS data entry, all of our HQS inspections, and a bunch of other stuff besides. And so we really didn't have a lot of storage space. And so overworked, understaffed, not a lot of storage space. The end result of that is that participant case files ended up sitting out on my desk, like kind of a lot for kind of a long time. And one day our executive director wandered into my office, spotted the case files that were sitting out on my desk and had obviously been like accumulating in a stack, and went off on me. And what she said to me, in 6 years of working there, however long I was there, you know, I don't believe I ever saw her angry, ever, but this once. And what she said to me was, you know, does this look right to you? No. Okay. Imagine you're this participant. How do you feel about the way your data is being handled? And the answer was I felt bad. Felt bad about it. And so I tell that story to lead with vulnerability and point out that like there are human repercussions on service providers and on participants for PII and its secure handling. But also that it's just so easy to overlook its necessity in the crush of the work that we're doing, because at the end of the day, we're oriented toward providing a service, and the service requires the collecting of data, and maintaining and securing personally identifiable information is often something that gets lumped in like reporting to the thing that you do after you do the service, when in fact securing PII is part of the service. It's a critical part of the service. So share all of that so that you can hear, first of all, that we all come from a place of ignorance to begin with, that we've all stumbled along the way, right? And that and the PII is important, right? There are ways to reorient yourself around PII. So thank you for letting me share that. I hope that illustrates a little bit where we're coming from on this. So our learning objective today, we're going to learn about what PII and what personally identifiable information is, what sensitive PII is, and how to identify and distinguish between them. We're going to understand your responsibility as HCD, the responsibility of your subrecipients, and the responsibility of your sub-subs when it comes to protecting PII and SPII. And finally, we're going to assess and review your role as HCD in protecting PII, including what you're supposed to do when there is a breach. And Mike, I see the chat is hopping. Please just hop in. Mike Thomas is manning the chat today. And so if there's something good in there that should be broken in, please just break in with it, though we will make sure there's Q&A time at the end. So our agenda today is really to answer the question, what are PII and SPII? What are your subs requirements and your sub-subs requirements? What are your requirements, and how do you put that into practice? So what are they? PII and SPII, and I'm just going to use the acronyms from here on out, are pieces of information that could be used to identify a person either by themselves or in combination with other information. Note that people will frequently use the term PPI interchangeably with PII, personally protected information. To the best of my knowledge, they mean roughly the same thing. And so I wouldn't worry about it. We're talking about the same thing, which is information that can be used to identify a person. ESG recipients, so HCD and your subrecipients and your subs, have a responsibility to be good stewards of a participant's PII, which means securing it, maintaining it, using it responsibly, and not disclosing it unlawfully. The direct responsibility mostly falls on subrecipients and their subs. Recipients and subrecipients are mostly indirectly responsible through your monitoring processes. So to put it a different way, your subs and your subs are mostly responsible for doing the actual work, and you're responsible for making sure that they are doing the actual work. Over time, the reality is that breaches are likely to happen. And you and your subs should know how to react when they do. But when you hear breach, I want you to not hear Equifax necessarily, like not a catastrophic breach. It's easy to mishandle PII because it's complex, it's everywhere, it's difficult, it requires thought and attention, it's easy to misstep. And so there's always the possibility of a breach. And so part of a response is assessing what the magnitude of the breach is and what the level of damage, potential or actual is. So PII, again, information which it's either or, information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity alone, or when combined with other PII, which is linked to that individual. And that definition is right out of an OMB circular that is linked on the slide. Examples of PII when alone, things like name, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, patient ID numbers, addresses, telephone numbers, biometric data, anything that by itself says, yep, okay, I know who that is. When combined with other PII, things like date and place of birth, race, religion, geographical indicators, like for example, that a person hangs around a certain area or can be found in a certain area, and financial information can be combined to identify a person. And I think I touch on this later, but I do want to hit on it now that PII is contextual, right? These are examples of things that are PII or could be PII in combination without context, right? A name will always be PII, pretty much. Social security numbers will always be PII. But especially in smaller communities or when you're dealing with people experiencing homelessness who are infamous or well-known, the standard for what constitutes identifiable information is contextual, to some extent subjective, and is going to be different than someone who is not well-known and might live in a much larger area with a larger pool of people experiencing homelessness. And I'll give you an example of that. In Louisiana, toward the back half of, but a year and a half into the COVID-19 pandemic, we started working with our statewide health department to put together a dashboard of vaccination rates in the homeless population. And we had initially gone into it being like, yeah, we can get really granular data. And our health department really pulled us up short on that. And the most narrow data that they were willing to give us was parish level or county level, everywhere else in the country, data on counties that had at least 10 people in HMIS who were experiencing homelessness. Anything less than that made the person identifiable from their perspective. And so they wouldn't give us that data.
Gordon, could I jump in with a quick question?
Hit me.
So for all the things we just showed for PII, should we have separate standards for things like victim service providers versus just a non-victim service provider agency?
Absolutely. So thank you for bringing up that question. Victim services providers and people who are fleeing domestic violence have different standards of data privacy that are explicit in the ESG program interim rule, which references the Violence Against Women Act, which establishes those protections. And we can dive into those a little bit more deeply, but in a very general sense, DV providers' participants' information is handled much more securely and needs to be handled much more securely than all other participants. And sort of the best and most prominent example of that is that DV participants' data is maintained in an HMIS comparable database rather than in a given COC's general purpose database. So look forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as I was saying, PII is contextual. I think I hit on all of this. The only thing I would add is this last point down here. The receiver does play a role. PII is contextual based on who is receiving it. Another service provider might be able to identify something based on a piece of information that a law enforcement officer would not, or vice versa. A law enforcement officer might be much more able to identify someone based on X than another service provider. So it's about being cognizant of the information, who is sharing it, and who is receiving it. So what is sensitive personally identifiable information? It's PII that when lost, compromised, or disclosed could substantially harm a person. And so, what constitutes SPII? It's social security numbers, it's medical records, it's financial information, immigration status, criminal records, medical info, information that could be used to locate a person fleeing domestic violence. It goes beyond just, it's anything that goes beyond just, I know that this person is a person experiencing homelessness, and into, if I have this information alone, I can do specific harm to them, or if this information got out, it would do specific harm to them. And I want to put in a plug that for people who are members of the LGBTQ+ community, like myself, there is PII that becomes SPII by virtue of whether we are out or not in certain communities and the ways in which we are out. And that's going to be contextual in communities as well. I am absolutely, I live in Louisiana. There are parts of Louisiana where the fact that I am queer is not an issue at all. I can be as out as I would like to be in New Orleans. There are parts of northern Louisiana where I would choose not to disclose that information because it could be used to harm me. So again, contextual. Who has the information, where is it going, and what does it mean to the people who receive it? So PII is always PII, doesn't matter how you store or secure it. PII can often be found in participant files on your computer or other digital media like thumb drives, external hard drives. If you're still using DVDs, you can find them in there, in your HMIS software, in long-term physical storage. So that's when you box stuff up and ship it out to wherever your agency keeps stuff in cold storage. But no matter how you store it, it's still PIA. And the steps that you take to protect it might be different, but the way that you store it and the level of security used doesn't change the nature of the information. You could bury it at the bottom of the ocean, it's still PII. Subrecipient requirements, no visual pun here, it's just files. And we say these are subrecipient requirements, but they also apply to recipients and to subs. We specify their subrecipient requirements because that's where they're most often applied. But when a recipient, and I say when because it is when a recipient, when HCD receives participant PII, it becomes your requirements as well, which is part of why you need to understand what it is. In general, ESG projects are required to collect PII, not just allowed to, but required to fulfill requirements like positively IDing a person, homelessness verification, income verification, HMIS matching and entry, on and on and on. Subrecipients are responsible for ensuring that PII is secured, not improperly disclosed and destroyed when appropriate, and it is appropriate once the period of maintenance expires. There are situations in which subrecipients are required to disclose PIIs to certain entities under certain circumstances, which is including HCD, right? During the monitoring process, you were legally allowed to have access to PII, though again, when we're talking about DV participants, it's a little more complicated. There are other entities, legislative auditors, HUD, are two examples of that, and in compliance with legal subpoenas, it gets a little sticky, but there are situations in which law enforcement can access PII as well. Most common breaches, remember I said earlier, breaches are going to happen. On a long enough timeline, a breach will always happen. The most common ones are you accidentally disclosing PII over email to somebody who shouldn't have access to it. So this is like a subrecipient emails you about a participant and includes their name because they have a legitimate question. Are you entitled to access to that information? Yes. Is the email server encrypted on both ends? Maybe. Do their encryptions play together? I don't know. It's a very common breach. And the other one that we see sort of constantly is including unredacted PII in invoices or monitoring responses. So, you know, as HCD, you say to your recipient, hey, give us this client file, and they ship you the client file. They don't redact anything, and now you've got social security numbers and medical information and names, and it's a mess. So we also want to note that every COC in California does provide PII to the state on a quarterly basis through HDIS. Dropped a link in there. Not something that I'm super familiar with, but it is something that occurs. And so do be aware that that is a route in which PII is disclosed legitimately. So here are your common PII collection points. It's not your only collection points, but they are the common ones. First time you meet a client, project intake, lease up, in case management, especially through case notes, at lease renewal and recertification, and a participant exit. It's when you are actively pulling data out of a participant and recording it somewhere. Common storage points, as we touched on earlier, physical participant files, your local electronic storage, which is your computer, your hard drives, thumb drives, in HMIS or HMIS comparable databases, and in long-term file storage. So that's when you ship your boxes off to wherever it is, whichever service. Recipient requirements. Mike, I see you popping in.
Yeah, sorry. Before we move on, could I jump back to SPII really quickly and ask, could you address in your thoughts how SPII applies to trans folks?
Sure. You know, it's a topic obviously near and dear to my heart, right? I just own that I'm a queer person and a member of the LGBTQ plus community. It is demonstrably true that people who are transgender experience rates of homelessness far greater than the normative population and have far worse outcomes when they are experiencing homelessness than the normative homeless population. And so all of that leads me to the conclusion that even in just absent homelessness, right, the fact that a person is transgender is SPII, period. Because it is, I mean, look at legislation, look at the way people who are trans are treated. If you've ever been on social media, if you've ever been to a Thanksgiving dinner with a multi-generational Thanksgiving dinner with folks who are not necessarily fully enlightened, you know, being trans is risky in society today. And so even absent homelessness, the fact that you are transgender or your gender, period. If you're transgender, if you're non-binary, if your gender presentation is not the same as your biological sex assigned at birth, all of those are SPII because they put you at risk if it is improperly disclosed. And there's any number of different ways that it could be improperly disclosed. Some of the common points of sort of improper disclosure or danger are in a shelter environment or another congregate environment. A person's gender is their business, right? It's nobody else's. And it's not a good environment in which to have sort of deep and soulful conversations about gender, or it's often not. I won't say that it's not, but it's often not. But also when we're talking about youth experiencing homelessness, who are maybe bouncing in and out of the homeless services system. A common reason, unfortunately, that youth experiencing homelessness do experience homelessness is because they come out to their parents or to the adults with whom they're living, whether they want to or not, and that triggers an episode of homelessness. So yeah, it's a really acute question, and it's certainly near and dear to my heart. And I would really highlight that gender identity is really a person's own business to disclose, and is very much sensitive PII.
Great answer. Thank you.
Thank you. So recipient requirements, this is HCD stuff. I see 11 messages in chat, so I'm going to try and burn through this so we can get to the Q&A. Highlights on this, you're going to most often interact with PII during the monitoring process and when a subrecipient needs guidance about a specific participant case. So we touched on one of these earlier this week when we were talking about the participant living in the potentially converted hotel into rapid unit. When a recipient needs guidance, they're going to kick it up to you and say, hey, John Doe, Jane Doe, Alex Doe, what do we do about this? And the answer is, first of all, don't tell me their names. This is the first answer. Your main responsibility as HCD is to ensure PII is being handled properly by your subrecipients, which is an ongoing activity and a monitoring activity. And when I say ongoing, what I mean is you don't have to call them every week and say, hey, breached any PII lately. What I mean is when something happens that is an improper handling of PII, it's your responsibility to address it in the moment, rather than to say, nah, we'll leave this to the annual monitoring. You address it when it comes up. Finally, and I'm going to expand on this a little bit verbally, you should really try to interact with PII as little as possible, right? As HCD, you should try and limit distribution of PII, limit your recipient requirements for security and disposal. Just don't, whenever possible, don't touch it, right? Because anytime you get a hold of PII, you are now, there's really kind of 2 or 3 consequences. One of them is when you get a hold of PII as HCD, you are now responsible for maintaining it, securing it, properly disposing of it. It's an additional burden of work. And if you don't absolutely need to have a hold of it, don't get a hold of it, right? You're entitled to it, but that doesn't mean that you need it, right? Don't collect it unless you need it, number one. Number two, though, and this is something that another TA provider pointed out to me years ago and that like haunts my nightmares. PII proper storage is complicated. And one of the realities is that, especially if you are emailed something about a participant, even if it is apparently clean of PII, but especially if it has PII in it or something that could be PII with other things, it now lives in your inbox, right? It's now almost certainly a public record as a state employee. And so state records are subject to FOIA requests, right? And can be subject to subpoenas or other legal discovery. And so if you happen to have PII sitting around in a place that could in theory be caught accidentally by one of these inquiries that are perfectly legal and have nothing to do with the PII, you could be in a position where you could accidentally disclose that information. Or if your policy is not to be really secure about PII, you can have to go through all of your emails and say, okay, does this have any PII in it? Which is just, I mean, it's a nightmarish use of work. And I'll share that in Louisiana, we came very close to a situation where an inquiry could have scraped that information from a very wide-ranging scrape of email requests, which was legit, which could have been legitimately produced, could have put us in a situation where we had to review every email that we'd ever touched within like a 2-year period to see if there was any PII in it. And avoiding that situation, either the consequences of it or just having to do the work, is profoundly to your benefit. Mike, I see you popping off of No Face. What's up?
Yeah, so if I'm a recipient and my subrecipients just keep sending me PII, even though I'm not necessarily asking for it, am I correct in assuming that I should maybe have some sort of expectation around that? How would policies and procedures?
Oh, I would go well beyond expectation, and I would go well beyond if they keep sending it. This is a great opportunity. So two things there. One of them is, and we're going to hammer on this every week, and we're going to tell you we're going to hammer on it every week. You should have a policy related to when you as HCD collect PII, what PII you collect, how you store it, and when you dispose of it, and how you dispose of it. One violation of that policy should be enough for you to be back in your subrecipient's face and saying, like, you did this thing and it's like not a big deal, but it's got, or maybe it is a big deal, but you got to fix it, right? And so here's the action, here's the consequence, here is the repair, right? And if a subrecipient kept doing it, that would be a problem, because now they're in violation of your policies and procedures under the ESG program. And frankly, this is a good place for contract language to say, you know, one of the contractual requirements is that the subrecipient will not disclose PII to any entity, including HCD, unless specifically required or requested. And that puts you in a position of saying, hey, you know, your contract says this, you need to be following your contract. And so there are multiple ways to secure what your process is and how you enforce down to your subrecipients that they have to maintain participant confidentiality. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. My cursor. There it is. See, and yours is like way ahead of me. So you have to develop your internal policies around PII. Responding and repairing is good. Actively monitoring, better, right? Do this, incorporate this into your annual monitoring. And your PI and your policies should ultimately include both proactive maintenance and a response if the breach occurs, when a breach occurs. So let's talk about putting theory into practice, and the visual pun there is that it's baseball practice, which is the best I could do. Really, there are 7 steps to data security. Should say 6 steps, because there's 6 things in front of you. Make peace with it. Really, it's about limiting what you collect, managing access to what you collect, protecting your files, securing electronic transmissions, working on your retention and disposal policies, and then responding when a breach does occur. In terms of limiting collection of PII, again, don't collect it unless you need it. When you do collect it, only collect the stuff you need. Make sure that you are authorized to collect it. An authorization has to come from a proper authority, like your supervisor, a statute or regulation, your own policy, and so on, and by your own paperwork, which is almost certainly an NDA and confidentiality agreement, which is probably one of the documents you signed when you came on board with HCD. Manage access. Only share on a need-to-know basis. Don't disclose it without authorization. Especially when you're discussing SPII on the telephone, confirm that you're talking to the right person and inform them that the conversation will include SPII, and don't leave PII on like voicemails or in a text or in an unsecured email, etc. The like classic example from 2 years ago is my COC was trying hard to develop an outreach policy that incorporated social media, because what we're finding is we couldn't get a hold of anybody texting them, and we couldn't get a hold of calling them, but like people had Facebook and responded to Facebook messages. And so the joke was, which was not a joke, was making absolutely rock solid sure that our emergency shelters weren't messaging people and being like, hey, your bed at the shelter is ready. You know, John Doe's emergency shelter bed is ready. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't leave messages like that. Make sure that the message is going to the right person. Make sure you're talking to the right person. Don't leave it where it shouldn't be. Avoid discussing PII if there are people around who aren't authorized to hear it. So this is really an internal office environment thing, like close the door in your conference room and make sure that the people who are in there are the people who should be in there. Treat meeting minutes and notes as confidential. So take meeting minutes and notes, treat them as confidential unless you can verify they do not contain PII, right? So whoever takes the meeting minutes and notes, go through them and have somebody else go through them, check them for PII before you publish them. For meetings that do include PII, record date, time, place, subject, chair, and attendees. So who was there, who got it, ultimately, when did it happen and who got access. And all of this is like quadruple true for sensitive PII. One side note about meetings where PII is discussed, there are legitimate reasons for discussing PII in meetings. Some of them are internal to HCD, like discussing a participant complaint. I've fielded a few of those in my time. Some of them are internal service provider meetings. So case conferencing is like the exemplar of this, right? Service providers legitimately discuss PII between them for the purposes of providing services, the best possible services to clients. It happens all the time. It's a best practice, and PII is discussed in those meetings, which should be recorded, noted, and held confidential. And those meetings can happen at the service provider level internally to the service provider, or between agencies. So the interagency case conferencing meeting is like a core part of coordinated entry, right? Or a core part of some coordinated entry systems where agencies get together and say, okay, within the confines of ensuring that this participant receives services, what's the best version of this? Who is best equipped to handle this participant? Again, that's called case conferencing. You might not know about it, but you should hear and learn about it because it is a best practice. Protecting physical files, it's pretty much what you'd expect. Label anything that contains PII, and as containing PII, say that it contains PII. Store files in lockable filing cabinets and then lock them. I cannot tell you how frequent it is that agencies have lockable filing cabinets and they just never lock them, or like they lock them but they leave the keys in the lock. That's not secure. It's just a filing cabinet. Don't leave PII in open areas unattended. So that goes back to my story from earlier. Don't use PII except in workstations and secure areas. So if you're sitting in your building's lobby, don't have a case file open in your lap. Treat external digital media like thumb drives, CDs, if you still have them, etc., the same way you would as physical files. Lock them up. Don't use them in unsecured areas. And develop a centralized record of where PII is stored, and then periodically check and make sure that that's actually true and things are where they say they are, which is a great place for your policy to step in and say, hey, we do this every year in June or whenever. For electronic files, it's a little more complicated. Develop a written policy for where stuff is stored. You're going to want to clearly distinguish between electronic files that do and don't contain PII. And ultimately, you're going to want to talk to your IT department about developing file storage systems and security measures, limiting access to files, data encryption. Talk to your IT people about it. Further, don't remove it from authorized facilities without approval from a written policy. Obviously, it's a little more complicated without homework, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And this goes back to I've seen this one too. Don't use interoffice mails. Don't use interoffice envelopes or translucent envelopes to send PII. Seal the envelope, mark it to the right person's attention. Double wrap envelopes sent through the USPS so you can't hold it up to the light and see through it. And if you send something by courier, require a signature on the other end to make sure it got where it was going. In general, for working from your home office, follow your agency guidance on who, what, where, when, why, and how accessing PII through physical and electronic files. Physical files still need to be secured. So it doesn't matter if you're in your home office or your office, lock them in a cabinet, actually lock it, take the key out of the lock. Electronic files should be password protected. Don't access or store them on a shared computer. So you've got a family computer at home. Don't pull up a participant file on it, please. Don't send files between unsecured email servers, and you can consult with your IT department to determine what meets that criteria. Follow guidance about PII in meetings. Don't screen share PII. And finally, just practice good cybersecurity policy. And there's a lot more of that in the slide notes, but generally speaking, it's the stuff that you hear all the time. Don't click a link you don't know. Don't open an email from somebody that you don't know. Don't open an attachment from somebody you don't know. Don't visit a website you don't know. Just be thoughtful, go carefully. When faxing PII, and I encourage you just not to, but when you're faxing PII, use date stamps, confirm the fax number, confirm the recipient is like waiting at the fax machine, confirm that they received the fax. This is a good time to pick up and call somebody and just stay on the phone while the fax goes and like talk about your weekend. Make sure your fax machine doesn't store a copy of the transmission. Like obviously a copy that the transmission occurred is fine, but like doesn't scan the transmission. Shred your physical copy of the transmission, and whenever possible, use a fax machine that uses a secure transmission line. Again, this is another good talk to your IT department moment. When you're emailing PII, same thing, make sure that you've got the right email address, confirm who you're sending it to, and whenever possible, use secure email transmission. If you absolutely have to send PII to an unsecure email server, encrypt the file. Don't store PII on shared drives, calendars, your internet, or the internet. Common culprits here, calendar invitation that says case conferencing meeting about participant name, or throwing a file up on Google Drive with a bunch of PII. Don't do those things. Finally, and I can't emphasize this enough, talk to your IT department. In terms of record management, retention, and disposable, you got to follow all of the applicable laws. The good place to start is 24 CFR 578-500, which covers ESG's confidentiality and period of record retention and access policies. It's a really good sort of quick hit on what you need to do. Don't maintain records longer than required. Slide notes include information about that. And once the record retention requirements are met, destroy them. Permanently erase the electronic records, shred physical records, talk to your IT department about how to permanently erase an electronic record. Finally, a data breach is any time that PII has been viewed, leaked to, accessed by someone who's not authorized to view or access it. And you'll note that that can range in severity hugely, right? From like somebody inside your organization saw a last name to you accidentally screen shared social security numbers for 30 participants. Wildly different scale of the thing. HUD requests that recipients, so you, report any suspected breaches of SPII in your programs to HUD's National Help Desk at the number displayed on your screen. Quick hit tips. Tell your subrecipients never to send you PII unless you explicitly request it, and consider making it a contractual requirement. Don't ask for PII unless you absolutely need it and you can't get the information in a different way. And when you're discussing participants outside your organization's authorized users, just the best tip in the world, use their HMIS ID instead of their name. Just talk about their HMIS ID, because that is not in itself PII, and it's difficult to combine that with other information to make PII. It's more difficult. During the monitoring and invoicing processes, if you request files, remind your recipients to redact them before they give you the files. And if they send electronic files, and this is just like, it happens all the time, they gotta double check the files. Usually this means redact, scan, print the scan, redact again, scan again, because like one run with a Sharpie doesn't usually do it. Finally, if you come into possession of PII, securely store it and then establish how you came into possession of it. This is a good time for a note to file. Finally, you cannot foresee all of the circumstances in which you might get a hold of PII. And we touched this earlier, stuff happens, and it's just outside your control. And this is a quote that I love. highlighted at the bottom in bold and underlined. The most successful hack is social engineering. Keeping your digital and physical work life secure and never handling PII when necessary is the best way to keep it safe. Don't touch it, and practice good cybersecurity just in general, and you'll be in a good position to keep everybody safe. Some resources here, you can refer to this. You are required in your policies and procedures to develop a process for ensuring all records containing participant PII are kept secure and confidential. HUD's also got a good primer on this that you can check out there, which brings us into the Q&A, which I'm excited about because the chat's up to 18 messages.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that have come in the chat. I'm responding to a couple now, but one I'm going to bring up for discussion first is, so when we think about things like leases, homeless certifications, I mean, those are going to have PII on them. How do we handle situations where we have to verify something like a lease or something like a homeless certification? So that could be for reimbursement, it could be for monitoring. How in general do we handle that?
Sure. So there's a couple of answers to that question. You know, as I said earlier, the very best trick on this one is HMIS IDs, right? Use HMIS IDs rather than client names. It gets around the leasing problem a lot. And so you can redact out a client name from a lease, ship off the lease, put an HMIS ID in there instead, and you're good to go in terms of that. If you absolutely must disclose PII as part of the lease, if a subrecipient absolutely must disclose, you require a subrecipient to disclose PII as part of a lease. You can do that, you're within your rights, but control who has access to that information, right? Secure it, stick it in a file somewhere, and think about ways in which you can transform PII into something that is not PII. So for example, I think we gave a suggestion a few weeks ago under the FMR and RR thing. You know, you don't need to see a lease every month, right? You could instead establish a register of these are the payments that we expect to make every month, right? And as long as the subrecipient is sending you an invoice that matches up with that, you don't need to see a new lease. And so establishing a policy that says we want to see a lease only when X, and otherwise just tell us the address, just tell us the street name, just tell us the HMIS ID. And if the dollar amount's the same as it was last month, then go with the dollar amount. You're fine.
Thank you. I'll take a moment before I go to the next one to see if anyone wants to unmute. If anyone wants to ask a question directly.
Oh, I actually want to hop in on this one, if you don't mind, Tony. I see you coming off real quick. I see Chris handled this one in the chat as I'm scrolling. Tuesday Act, a really good question about HIPAA versus ESG privacy. And I think Chris hit it really well. But the thing everybody's got to get through their heads, and this is a really common thing in homeless services provision because there is overlap and fluidity in staffing between HIPAA and non-HIPAA providers. The ESG privacy requirements are much lower and different than HIPAA. And you got to get through your head, like, if you're not handling medical information and if you're not covered by HIPAA, then you can disclose stuff and are required at times to disclose information that HIPAA would like send up 15 red flags on. And so distinguishing between those and being really clear about what is and isn't HIPAA required and who is and isn't HIPAA required is an important part of navigating that. It's, you know, it's a little less so for ESG because you can't fund permanent supportive housing with ESG. But if you happen to get into HOPWA or PSH under the COC program, you know, that comes up constantly, is what is HIPAA versus what is HUD. So yeah, Tony, I saw you pop off and want to make sure you get your moment in the sun.
I think you covered it, Gordon. Thank you. I just coming from a little bit different background, but also a state agency monitoring and compliance and so on. I just am trying to get my head around the differences with ESG and HCD versus all of the documentation collected by, say, our finance department or our loan department, and they're collecting mass amounts of PII on individuals. And how are they getting around that? And of course, that's not a question for you probably, since you're not with HCD, but that is going through my mind, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of that. And just so we don't reinvent the wheel in putting together our PII policies for ESG, but at the same time, just to have a general understanding of how it fits in with what we do.
Sure.
Thank you.
And it is a little outside my scope. I'm not going to try and be a loan expert because I'm not. I think the only thing that I will say on that is do keep in mind that you are entitled under the ESG program to participant PII. You're absolutely entitled to have full access to client files if you really want them. What we're talking about today is both what the letter of the law is, but also what you want to do. And so your loan department may have very different pressures in terms of what they want to collect, what they need to collect, and what they need to do their job than you do. And it is my perspective, and I would assume other folks in my position would have a similar perspective, that as the ESG recipient, you generally do not need to touch PII very often and want, whenever possible, to avoid touching PII. I do see in the chat, I see Giovanni was the person who asked about SPII around trans folks. I feel like I answered the first part of that question, but I do want to cover really quick. So Giovanni brings up the dead naming, and this is actually really timely because I've been writing today about the equal access rule for an upcoming new and non-trad provider training in terms of other federal requirements. Dead naming, it absolutely could be PII or SPII, but it's more complicated than that. It's both about PII and SPII, but it's also about just like treating people right. In much the same way that we go through the process of enunciating our pronouns, right? If a person tells you that their name is blah, then call them blah. And that's kind of the long and the short of it. As much as I would like and I'm mostly joking here, as much as I would like a federal law against dead naming, it doesn't exist. So really just think about it in terms of, is this PII, can it be used to identify a person? Is this SPII, can it be used to materially harm a person? And psychological harm is material harm.
Gordon, can you first take down the slides so we can just all see each other? I just want to kind of go back to one of our troubleshooting Tuesdays, and I think it was a Tuesday. It could have been a Wednesday. I don't know. But we were talking through the rent reasonableness calculations, and in that conversation, we saw the client's name, and that is just what happens sometimes. It's not a huge deal, but it is something that we just need to be cognizant of. I think you've hit it. If we don't need it, let's not have it. But if we have it, we need to protect it. So I just wanted to say that we saw that wasn't a big issue, but we want to have a good process for how we handle all that as a group and write it down. And that's the same thing I think we say every time we have a policy and put it in writing. So I just wanted to kind of say those two things and then let y'all keep going.
Cool. I did see a question in the chat come through around the Privacy Act of 1974, and specifically the fines and penalties associated with improper disclosure. We did not touch on that. The Privacy Act of 1974 absolutely is involved, and I believe the ESG interim rule points directly at it. I encourage you to go do reading on your own, but the sort of top line of the thing is if you are responsible for an improper disclosure of protected information, you or your organization can be held responsible for that legally, which can involve criminal consequences as well as financial consequences, which sounds terrifying. I have certainly not seen that happen in my areas of the woods. I'm sure that it has happened somewhere. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to opine further, but I encourage you to familiarize yourself with those realities.
I think it's another place where we can say policies and procedures are incredibly important, because if you have a clear procedure for dealing with an improper breach there, then, you know, should this come into play, your best defense is we reacted exactly how we said we would react if this happened.
Yep. Also, we talked 17 times in this presentation about talk to your IT department, talk to your legal department. That's what your lawyers are for. Have them read your PNP, have them keep an eye on this stuff for you. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, to that end, as a person with an HCD email address, I get emails just like you all do from IT asking us to do a bunch of trainings and that kind of stuff. Those things pretty much cover what Gordon covered. If there's information not to disclose it. I think the last couple have been about public Wi-Fi and what how hackers can take our information, that kind of stuff. But your IT department has a lot of great resources as far as trainings, because I've had to attend many of them, as I know you have as well.
Yep. And this is, I think the only thing that I would add is this is not the fun training. There are fun trainings. I think FMR and RR is fun because it's tweaky and weird and you can go down a rabbit hole. This is not the fun training. And you're going to come away from this training not feeling good, because there's only bad things that can happen as a result of mishandling PII. There's no award for doing it right. It's just, you gotta get it right. And so if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling unsure, if you're feeling like, oh shit, this isn't how we've always done this, okay, that's a normal feeling. And the response shouldn't be, this isn't how we've always done this, so we're gonna keep doing it the wrongish way. It's, this is a good opportunity to take stock of your practices, develop strong policies, put them into place, push them down to your subrecipients, incorporate this into your monitoring process. And when you're confronted with an opportunity to speak with your subrecipients about their handling of PII, then confront them in a way that is not punishment oriented, but is protection oriented. Because the bottom line is, put the Privacy Act to the side, put the federal requirements to the side, put all of it to the side. At the end of the day, what you are trying to do is to protect people who are very, very vulnerable from becoming more vulnerable. And you can do that. That's what this is about. And so if you focus on that, at least in my experience, it becomes a lot less like, oh, Jesus, there's like 30 requirements, and much more about like, okay, this is something I could proactively do to help people who need help.
Thanks, Gordon, and thanks, Mike, for walking us through this today. Are there any additional discussion points or questions? I know, as Gordon said, this is the sexiest training, but it is so important. And as I said, we got a question yesterday about redaction. I can't remember which community it was, but they were saying, in order for us to redact everything, it's going to take us a lot more energy, which means you might have some communities that don't have the energy to spend and are going to send you PII, and then it's upon us as HCD to maintain confidentiality on that. Yep, it's going to get you going as far as monitoring. Kind of, you are right there. Any last comments? We have 3 minutes left, or we can just end a little bit early.
Chris, if I can ping off of the case in point that you brought up there, I was thinking about this earlier, and I wanted to add, just if a subrecipient, if what you request is up to you. If you say to a subrecipient, we want and they say that the redaction burden on that is gigantic, we can't do that, you can say, okay, well, let's talk about what's reasonable, right? You have the flexibility to be responsive to your subrecipients' needs to meet their redaction requirements without grabbing too much PII out of them. It's always what does your policy allow? And there's nothing wrong with having something in your policy that says HCD can make exceptions to this policy for a good reason in consultation with blah, blah, as it deems fit.
Great. Aaron, I saw you come on video. Do you have something to say, or were you just saying hi? Okay, great. I'm seeing nothing else. Marisa, I saw your comment in the chat. Thank you for that. Any last comments before we depart?
I just want to say, I think we have lots to talk about.
Oh, I'm sure Tuesday. Hey, Connie.
So just quick, so next week is the clinic part of this, right?
No.
This is the whole shebang. We only had one on PII. If you want us to get deeper into clinics, we can do that. Next week, we were going to turn to match, I believe. Is that correct?
Oh, okay. I guess so. Okay, so I guess as a team, we talk about maybe what redacting and what things we feel like we should start crossing out or having our grantees cross out. So
yeah, it felt like it was kind of give you the grounding, and I think what Tuesday said is we have a lot to talk about. There's probably a policy that needs to be created. I think we can talk more about it either in this space or Troubleshoot Tuesday, whatever makes the most sense to help you move idea into practice. But it felt like that we probably needed to give you some space for that, because this is not an easy conversation.
yeah, and I like that idea. I don't know see if the team thinks that. So maybe one of our Troubleshoot Tuesdays, we can actually take a backup documents that we got in, maybe a lease. Somebody sent us a lease with all the name of the client and everything, and then maybe we can go through and walk through. Okay, this has to be redacted. This has to be redacted. This has maybe that for a visual. Maybe that would be, we could take some actual documents we got in.
Yeah, I think this Troubleshoot Tuesday is pretty light so far. I think we just have one thing to talk through. So we could potentially do it next week. We can also give you space to have these conversations and develop your policy a little bit more and talk through that policy. So those are options before you and the team. Connie, Tony, I see you popped on.
It would need to be a made up list, or otherwise we would be breaching what we're talking about right now.
I think my next presentation uses exclusively names from Shakespeare plays. So it's just grab a list of names that's easy to hand.
There you go. Okay. Thank you. Hopefully you got enough to get your PII conversation moving. Again, we can revisit this. Next week, we are going to do match. And I think we have 2 weeks of match. We have the overview and then the clinic. Match obviously becoming a bigger issue for you than for us on the ESG CV side, because we're exempt, but you all are not. So that's definitely something I think you guys wanted sooner rather than later. So we
Absolutely. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you all for your time.
See you next week.
Thank you so much.